Hey, the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit is made possible by Samara Toss, which is the state's largest private foster care and adoption agency. But they do a heck of a lot more than that. They've been serving homeless families, persons with disabilities, abused and trafficked women. They're also one of the largest resettlement agencies in the state. They provide market rate and affordable housing for seniors and HUD housing for families. And they also have skilled nursing, memory care, and rehab communities in Grand Rapids, Cadillac, and Saginaw. Samara Toss, thanks for their support. Great organization, doing great stuff all around the state. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the week that was here on Deadline Detroit. I'm Craig Fahle, and of course, I am joined by Nancy Derringer and Allan Lengel of Deadline Detroit.
Hello, hello.
It's a pleasure to have you back. You know, I was gone last week. We were up on Mackinac, so we didn't get to do this last week, but I'm happy to do it this week. It's been crazy. As usual,
it's
lots of stuff going
crazy.
on. And obviously we are Deadline Detroit, but obviously what happens with the president affects all of us, everybody in this great nation. So I would like to spend a little time recapping the visit of the president to, of course, Mother England and, of course, the shores of Normandy that took place over the course of the last few days. You know, what was interesting to me is that, you know, he took time out of his busy schedule to trash Nancy Pelosi while he was over there.
It was such a disgrace.
Well, and people are saying that he shouldn't do that. And I thought to myself, well, this is on Laura Ingram's show. She's the one that threw the chum in the water on this one.
I
Fox
don't even
News
care. I don't
gave him the opportunity
even
to do it.
Care. I am so disgusted with this behavior that comes out. And in a time like this, you know, our most important ally, our most, tweeting on the way over, tweeting, trash talk at the mayor of London, spending time during what should be a solemn observation of one of our great moments in the Western civilization that they're always claiming to care so much about, to trash Nancy Pelosi and Bob Mueller. I mean, it's disgusting and it's disheartening. I mean, I feel like the wind is going.
Well, what do you think of the Queen giving him a copy of Winston Churchill's book?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was not just symbolic. I mean, that was
sure.
sort of like, hey, maybe you should read.
Yeah.
I think she has low expectations of how much of that book he's going to read.
Yeah, I think probably so.
I mean, I thought it was hysterical that he said about Vietnam. He says nobody even had heard of Vietnam at the time. Like,
right.
I actually tweeted something about that the other day. He's like, I was never a fan of that war. That's
Yeah.
why I didn't go. And I'm like, you know what? I was 6 weeks old when my dad got shipped off to Vietnam. I'm pretty sure he wasn't a fan either, but he served and he went and did it.
Cadet Bone Spurs did not, however.
Well, that bothered me a little bit. I mean, because
it should.
It's the 75th anniversary of DDay. My grandfather served in World War II in the Pacific Theater on a bomber out there.
My father did. My husband's father did.
And it's just, you've got these guys who are still alive up there, these 90-something-year-old people who were involved in one of the most important military operations of all time. And, you're taking away from that saying, well, hey, I'm serving now because I'm giving the military more money. It was everything about this was a bad look.
It was repulsive. And then schlepping the entire family over there like it's some kind of, I mean,
he wanted to have his kids meet with
with the princes,
like
with Harry.
He used the term play date yesterday. I think that was you.
Not even a play date. I mean, that's what that tells you is this is a man who considers himself a peer, his children to be peers to the princes of England, which is just a
theoretically, in theory. I mean, the royals should not be above.
No,
other
they're
people.
not. Of course not. We live in a democracy.
Exactly.
We overthrew the royal. But I mean, for them, he calls it a next generation meeting. Like they're going to be like when this awful chapter
Don
is
Jr.
over.
Don Jr. 2040,
and Ivanka and Tiffany and all the rest of them are going to be remembered as anything other than the toilet paper that he trailed up the door of the steps of Air Force One. Sorry, but that's what I think of them as. I saw that picture of the five of them, and the spouses standing there before the state dinner. It's I can't.
Now,
I just can't.
Getting back to the important matter of the week.
But how do you feel? Really, how do you feel about
yesterday
that?
was the 75th anniversary of the Normandy invasion.
I
mean, and it felt a little bit different this year, just because of maybe it's those big anniversaries sort of make it seem that way. But I mean, I think that knowledge that 5 years from now, most of those people who were sitting there behind the president. Who actually the president did do a good job in the speech portion of that yesterday, I thought, in honoring a lot of these guys and their stories.
Did you use the word phenomenal, fantastic?
It's the bare minimum.
Unbelievable. Okay.
But these guys are not going to be here next time.
No. I mean, and that's kind of the 50th.
Yeah,
the 50th anniversary of any major event, whether it's the Detroit civil unrest of 1968.
67.
7.
I'm sorry, you're right. 67. The release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Anything
Also 67.
Anything that you can. 50 years is kind of like that is the peak and after that people start dying off. And now we have, like you said, the guys who are left, who participate in that are
There's a 100-year-old guy that parachuted out of a plane to recreate his 101st Airborne experience.
97
from that.
97. If you're gonna nitpick my dates, I get to nitpick yours.
But still, I thought that was a neat gesture. And the guy, when he gets down on the ground, said, "You know what? If they sent me over there now, I'd do it all over again."
Yeah,
I mean, that just shows how seriously they took what they were doing.
My husband's father, who we did not marry until after he died, so I can't call him my late father-in-law, but I guess he would have been my late father-in-law. Was an infantry paratrooper in all over Europe, and he won 3 Purple Hearts, and I don't like to speak for the dead, but I think he'd be about as disgusted with the current state of affairs as anyone.
One person who is not disgusted with our current president is our former mayor, Kwame Kilpatrick. This is our top story. This is our top story on Deadline this week.
And kudos to our fearless leader for getting that.
He sends this letter to Donald Trump trying to appeal to him to maybe get a pardon or something.
Yeah.
But the way that this is written, and this is the part about this that I think is just great. It says, quote, "I first want to congratulate you for the overwhelming and stunning victories of your presidential campaign and also the unprecedented success of your first 2 years in office. You have shaken up the entire world, and that is a great thing to behold." Okay, Kwame Kilpatrick was a Democrat. First of all, have you read anything? This is like
this really
is like watching Smithers on The Simpsons.
It does.
I think it's one of those things.
It's also full of grammatical and punctuation.
It clearly is pandering to a guy who clearly loves to be applauded and stuff like that. And here, I think one of the funnier paragraphs here is really hitting home. He's trying to say, "You and I are simpatico here." He goes, "The feds opened their investigation against me in February 2002, just 1 month after I took office. The feds are politicians. They choose sides in elections. They didn't want me to win. I wasn't their choice. I ran a grassroots, people-driven campaign and shook up the establishment. I beat them twice. I know you know a great deal about this." And that was, I thought, in some ways brilliant, because he's really just saying, "Hey, you and I, look, we got a lot in common, except you're in the White House and I'm in a federal prison in New Jersey
for another 20 years." I mean, and it's looking like he doesn't. This is his last shot of reducing his sentence in any way.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think once. I mean, he tries to imply in his letter that he's been in prison for almost 8 years when it's really almost 6 years.
Yeah.
But I would think if you get up to 10 or 15 years, I think some president might say, "All right, what's the point of this?" And I agree. I think the sentence was too severe, 28 years. I don't know what the point is of that, but I mean, he's exhausting all his appeals on. He just got knocked down again at a ruling yesterday by Judge Edmonds. He's not getting anywhere on his appeals at all.
No.
And I don't think he's going to win on that front. But at some point, someone may say, "Yeah, 28 years, what's the point? This he's an old man already. He's really given away a lot of his life." So,
yeah. However,
I think that's his best hope at this point. Or if he gets sick. Always
this letter, like you said, this is kind of Smithers in a chalk stripe suit. I mean, it really is something, and I'm also struck by how badly punctuated it is.
Well, and if you have not read this, letter, go to Deadline Detroit. It's right under the section that says Most Read, just so you can read it and see just how pandering this whole thing is. And he does, though. He is brilliant about hitting the right strokes on.
Look, if you're gonna ask the President Trump for a break, you have to write a letter. You have to craft it in this way. I mean, that's, look, the guy is easily flattered.
Right.
And he understands that.
Yeah.
Another story that top of the page today that's out there right now here on Deadline Detroit is over concern about a potential serial killer on the east side of Detroit that seems to be targeting sex workers. There are three different murders that we know of at this point. Bodies all recovered in abandoned houses in the city of Detroit. And the community seems to be up in arms, suggesting that maybe the mayor and the police chief have not exactly been forthcoming about what's really happening over there. There's a lot of concern.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there was, it was only just a couple of weeks ago that the police chief was dismissing concerns that there was, of course, that was a rumor that, he said was untrue. But, I think that at the street level, people tend to pick up on these things maybe a little before the police do, and I think people were aware that something like this was happening. Of course, being a sex worker, particularly one who kind of, like this, it can be an extremely dangerous job, and that's not to say that. I mean, certainly
no justification for this.
No,
obviously.
there's no justification for it whatsoever. But I mean, this is desperation level.
But the police, I can understand their concerns a little bit. You don't want to tip off somebody that you might be on their trail if you have some sort of an idea that these things are linked, connected in some capacity.
Right.
And Allan, I mean, you've covered law enforcement for a long time.
On the other hand, you have to tell the people who are being targeted.
Agreed. This is a balancing act that's a tough one for the police chief.
I think the question is what number is a tipping point. It's funny. I used to run fugitive photos once a month at the Detroit News, different fugitives, and sometimes they would wait for bank robbers, like the same one, to rob like 20 banks before they finally said, yeah, hey, can you run this? And I'm like, why do you got to wait? There's 20, 25 banks that they've robbed, and I think there's always that balancing act, how many crimes you wait until, but obviously this is any pattern there is certainly a frightening one, and we've seen this before all around the country, where we see sex workers who are been murdered. Like they'll find 8 of them, and and they've all been murdered, and usually by the same person,
by the same guy.
So
well, and this also just highlights a number of different problems that the city is facing. I mean, you've got infinite numbers of places, with about 30,000 abandoned houses in which to stash bodies or for bad things to happen. I mean, it's sort of
right. Yeah. I saw that Mike Nevin, the firefighters union president, was quoted in the news saying this happens. Like, they find bodies in abandoned buildings all the time. And I mean, I don't know how often all the time is, but it makes sense. I mean, people shelter in them in cold weather. There are squatters.
The Wire.
The Wire.
The Wire
whole
did a
season.
big thing about all these abandoned homes.
In Baltimore.
It seems like where they were boarding up
With
and
the
they
nail
had certain
guns,
bolts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there were certain nails or bolts or whatever. And it's
it's
obvious place to stash,
Right.
There's no shortage.
Yeah.
Let's move on to a couple of other stories. Interesting week for Fiat Chrysler. We won't necessarily get into the whole merger thing because I'm going to deal with that on Monday. That fell through for Fiat Chrysler. They're going to merge with Renault, but that just sort of dropped.
Right.
But
somebody was telling me that one of the issues was the unions are very strong in France.
and plant closures.
Yeah, there was
politics in France is a big problem.
There was some concern that Fiat Chrysler wanted some guarantees that there wouldn't be plant closings, and I think
Renault did. Renault wanted.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, when you look at the protests that have been happening in France,
right? I was just going to say this is what the Yellow Vest protests are all about. Is kind of,
Right.
and it's the same. It's the same sort of this sort of uprising of the working class all over the world. Which is don't find your efficiencies in our livelihoods, essentially.
Well, the other thing that they announced, though, is that, yes, they've suggested that they want to give preference to Detroiters for hiring at the plant, but they warned everybody that they're going to be testing for weed, which, of course, is legal now in Michigan. And even people with a prescription, you're not going to get a job if you're smoking pot. And the weird thing about pot is that, obviously, it stays in your system for a long time, even if you haven't smoked it in a long time. So
this is something we're going to have to work out. There's going to have to be better testing.
I think also
not sure you can.
There's schizophrenia, and there has been for quite a while with marijuana at the federal level, state level. And I think finally during the Obama administration with Eric Holder as Attorney General, they basically told the DEA, hey, lay off these little pot busts. And, I mean, to
they
this
also
day, there's
they
a lot
also
of...
told the states that were legalizing it, do you. We're not going to interfere in this.
Right. And then Jeff Sessions came in and said how horrific marijuana is and how dangerous of a drug it is. And so it's been such. I mean, eventually we have to have one law that we shouldn't be able to. The Fed shouldn't be able to trump, so to speak, state law. And I mean, look, for a long time, I mean, pot has been legal in all these little communities, Huntington Woods, I think Berkeley, Ferndale.
Detroit.
Yeah,
Detroit legalized
and yet it's still not cool to, it's like you're not supposed to be able to buy it anywhere.
Right, I know.
And so it's just kind of a ridiculous
Right.
inconsistency there.
I'm skipping ahead because you mentioned Huntington Woods. Another story that's on Deadline this week. Huntington Woods again, became the first city in Michigan to ban gay conversion therapy. I have a feeling there will be others that follow suit. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a ban on it statewide at some point in time.
Is there a lot of gay conversion therapy that even goes on anymore? I mean,
know,
most
I'm not
reputable therapists, I believe, would never do something like this. I imagine at the
Well, a lot of these
clergy
things,
level,
that's the whole thing. That's where a lot
Right.
of this stuff is happening.
right? At the clergy level, maybe not, or maybe
I mean,
so.
I imagine driving through Huntington Woods and seeing like clergy standing at the corner, monitoring people, talking to them, and handing out literature.
Right.
And Huntington Woods finally saying enough
Enough.
with this gay conversion stuff. Let's put an end to it.
But it does
it
seem
seems
it's
bad.
How did Huntington Woods come up with that?
Well,
that-
they're trying to. I mean, I don't know
It's
how
a
much.
symbol. It's more.
It sends a message
obviously
about what your
symbolic.
community is and that you're
What you care
welcoming
about.
and all
Yes.
that kind of stuff. And I mean,
Right.
for one, gay conversion therapy doesn't work.
No.
And if anybody wants just to watch something really, really funny about this, one of the best South Park episodes ever is when they sent Butters to the Pray the Gay Away camp. And he has his accountability buddy.
Why do we need to always bring up South Park and Family Guy in this website? Because
South Park,
Because it's
They
some of
don't
the
say-
best.
remember
And Beavis and
satire
Butthead.
matters.
Do you
Satire gets
And The
through to
Simpsons.
people.
Yes, it does.
It gets
but
through
do
to
you,
people.
Do you remember the famous cover of Time magazine about gay conversion therapy? And it featured a couple posing as Grant Wood's American Gothic, I believe, and it was a man who had been gay or claimed he had been cured of homosexuality, and his wife who was a lesbian. And not too long after that, he was arrested in a DC bar, gay bar, cruising somebody.
Yes.
So I mean, there's come to terms with who you are, and just let's all accept one another and who we love.
I
and
mean,
just
all those.
give this
What,
stuff up.
what were the men who all came to D.C. as sort of this?
The Million Man March?
No, it was.
Oh.
There were something.
Oh, the Promise Keepers.
The Promise
Yeah,
Keepers.
right.
It was so funny. I was working at the Washington Post at the time, and I get sent over. They say, "Hey, we heard there's a lot of these Promise Keepers. They're supposed to be good Christian men coming together in unity." And they say, "Hey," they sent me to a topless bar. They said, "We heard they're all hanging out at this topless bar on K Street." And I went over there and I talked to the manager. He said, "Yeah, there were a group here earlier, but I don't see any right now."
Yeah, they're doing research. They're doing important research. Yeah.
They're telling their wives,
na-
"Look, this is all about
and the nature of our
community
moral decline.
and-
No, I followed Benny in there to pull him out.
Right.
That's right. That's right. He was sinning, and I needed to save him. Okay,
And
so
one of the Jezebels
speaking of
got me.
interesting behavior,
Yeah.
State Representative Larry Inman, of
Yes.
course, is he's from Traverse City area, Republican. He has been asked to resign, or had been being pushed to resign because he was indicted for accepting bribes.
Right.
Now they have backed off of that, saying, okay, well, now that he's getting treatment for opioid addiction, he says he's had a problem for a long time. They're backing off on their threats to force him out, hoping that maybe just his personal issues require him to step down at some point in time. But it seems like
I don't know.
What do you think?
Opioid,
Does that explain what he did? Is he trying to say that I was high when I made these decisions?
It's a good question.
solicit
I mean,
bribes?
we've been there's been a very strong and generally praiseworthy movement in this country over the last few decades to accept that addiction is a disease. Okay, it's not a character flaw or a moral failing. And he never did say he had an addiction. He just said he is seeking treatment for.
That was an old thing in Washington. Anytime somebody got in trouble, either they were like hitting on pages,
Right.
or they were doing
Checking into
something
rehab.
illegal. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to rehab, and I was saying, I was
Taking
telling
a wide
story.
stance in an airport bathroom.
Right. I was telling the story that I wanted one of the cartoonists at the Washington Post to do a little cartoon where it had when Saddam Hussein was on trial in Iraq, and you have the judge saying, "Saddam Hussein, you've killed 5,000 Kurds. What do you have to say for yourself?" And he'd say, "I'm checking into rehab." And it seemed to be the go-to line there. So when I heard this, the guy's getting treated for opioids for what?
Well, the Republicans might think he was probably under the influence of something when he was willing to trade his
think
vote on
under the
prevailing wage, which is their favorite thing in the world.
Under the influence of greed.
That's
Yeah.
right. Under the influence of greed. That's exactly it. Let's stay statewide politics for just a second. John James has decided that he wants to jump into the U.S. Senate race, although technically I don't think it's going to be official till the next calendar year because there's all sorts of rules about fundraising and stuff like that. Yeah. But he announced on Fox and Friends yesterday that he's going to take on Gary Peters in the U.S. Senate, suggesting that Gary Peters has low name recognition and therefore he's vulnerable this time around. And he only lost by 6 points to Debbie Stabenow, which means that something could happen.
Well, I think in the Stabenow race, she was a sure winner until she decided that she was a sure winner, and she stopped campaigning as much as she should have. And the night of the election, she was actually scared because he was ahead briefly and stuff like that. But I think he's a shameless panderer. He called he was taking the Donald Trump play card of calling the Democrats a godless party.
Right.
They ran an ad, which it was by a PAC, but he basically
calling abortion black genocide.
Yeah, black genocide. And at that point, I thought, like, this guy has no shame.
Well, he was doing what he felt he needed to do. I think it's interesting. If I were Debbie, talk about grading on the curve. He lost by 6 points, which in politics it's not a landslide, but it's very decisive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And because that was the smallest win percentage that she had since being elected in 2000, that was considered like, a great performance by John James. And so now he's going to take on, for first timer. And now he's going to take on Gary Peters, and, we'll see what happens. I've heard Gary Peters speak off the cuff. I've heard him speak in a speechy situation, and he's going to be hard to beat.
Well,
he comes out very thoughtful, very informed. He is not a high-profile senator by any means.
He needs to raise his profile then. But I don't think.
But John James.
What's
it's
he
interesting.
running on?
He did not resonate very well in the city of Detroit, which is significant.
I don't understand what his platform is. When he was running against Stabenow, it was vote for me because I will back our president all the way.
And I'm a veteran.
And I'm a veteran. It's like I don't know.
And Gary Peters is in the Naval Reserve, if I'm not mistaken. So
I'm going to keep this a light rant, okay? I am tired of I am not a career politician, vote for me. It's like, hey, I want a career dentist to work on my teeth. I want a career car mechanic to work on my car. It's like, can we just once in this country reward competence?
People have been
underestimating Gary Peters for years. And Debbie
Stabenow.
And he just keeps winning. So I first met him back when I was covering the Capitol in Lansing. He was the first term in the state Senate when I was just a rookie reporter up there.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's very bright.
I've watched his career go. He just keeps moving up.
I know.
He's not flashy, but he is. He's very competent. He understands the issues.
And he did have the good fortune of running against Terry Lynn Land the last time.
And he's avoided scandals.
Right.
Which is always good.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's always a good one.
Well, let's stay on politics for just a little bit because Warren politics are wonderful, obviously. We spend a lot of time talking about the mayor of Warren, but I learned a lot. I don't pay that close of attention to Warren, and I should, because it is one of the largest cities in the state. Third, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Their city council have found a way to get around their own rules about term limits.
Chad Selweski's column on that was, I edited it. It was a joy to read. But, he did because
and
what had happened was,
I don't know if you saw that. It's been reversed now.
Yeah.
What has?
The appeals court let them run.
Oh, they did?
The appeals court on Thursday.
Happened today.
Right, on Thursday.
All right, here's what happened.
Yeah.
In 1998, they passed term limits in Warren, okay? There are people who have been on the council ever since kind of dodging this term limit, and they got apparently some opinion from the city attorney, which they asked for, according to Chad, via an intermediary. And David Grimm, the city attorney, came up with this idea that because they also went to a district system, that that the 5 on who represented districts
is one
were
branch.
one branch of the
Exactly.
city council, and the 2 at large were another branch, similar to like a bicameral legislature.
Exactly, which-
and so just as in Lansing,
Clever.
you can serve so many years in the House and so many years in the Senate, they decided that you could serve a few years as a district rep and then 12 more as a at-large rep, and for a total of 24 years, which is like on a city council.
So, exactly. And so what's going on in that city council that you want to be there for 24
Well,
years?
that's the
Because
thing.
I've been to a lot of city council meetings in
Oh
my
my
career.
gosh.
I can't imagine doing that every day. There's a reason that would never run for one of those offices.
It is truly service. It is a totally thankless job because you show up once or twice a month to have people yell at you. Depending on,
there is status in the community, I think.
I guess there's some
And-
status,
and
but
you
I
have
mean,
some priprivileges.
everybody
imagine.
I've known who's served at that level,
Get out of
school
parking
board,
tickets. It's Warren.
Speeding tickets.
city council, whatever. They all quit after a couple of years, going, I got better things to do with my life. So there you go, a couple terms.
But I would think, you're a city council member, something happens you don't like, and you call up the police department and you call the chief and say, hey, we need to address
Right.
this. So there was some influence there, and you have friends who say, I'm going to call city council member so-and-so, and I think people like to feel important. And
Yeah.
So.
Well, yes, but it's Warren. I mean, there's never anything normal that happens.
Forget
there
it,
in
Jake.
politics.
It's Warren.
The fact that we're there, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's cracking me up a little bit. All right, where should we go? We've got just a couple of minutes left here. Some things that I wouldn't mind getting to here. Ex-airport official. Now, we talk about public corruption. I don't know if you saw this, but the ex-airport official, a $5 million bribe and kickback scheme, he was convicted in Detroit this week.
Is this the guy who ate the cocktail napkin?
That's there you go. This is the guy.
That was
this
a
is the
good
guy who was a
story.
field inspector at the airport, and he was apparently engaged in multiple schemes to defraud the airport authority at the time. So basically, you had to go
amount-
through this guy to get what you needed, and he took advantage
And
of
he
it.
The
made $5
amount
million.
of money that he made is astonishing.
That's
Was it
impressive.
$5 million?
He
I
should have
thought it
been
was $2 million.
director.
But yeah,
if
five,
he's that smart.
Turkey and Mullen. Yeah.
Well, hey,
$5 million, that's impressive. And then supposedly he left the job in 2014. In 2017, he went to work for West Bloomfield as like in their sewage department or something. And one of the guys who was involved with the scheme to get kickbacks from, he started that up in West Bloomfield. So.
Huh. Okay.
and
It's important for our public officials to supplement their salaries.
Right.
there you go. And lastly, the measles outbreak is now declared over in Oakland County. 44 cases, 4 months long, an unnecessary outbreak, and one that freaked a lot of people out.
Particularly young children who are not old enough to be vaccinated.
Have we learned any lessons from this?
I have. I don't know about the rest of them. When I posted this on our Facebook page yesterday, I kind of did 3, 2, 1 and waited for one of our usual suspects who always steps in to counter vaccines. But for my money, if there's a shot out there, I'm getting it. So I'm not worried.
Yeah.
I'm tough as a grapefruit skin. You could put anything in me, I'm gonna be fine.
All right. Well, stuff that we're going to be looking forward to next week that we expect maybe some movement on. We might actually see some movement on road funding beyond the idea that came out yesterday to potentially sell the Blue Water Bridge, because we know how well private ownership of international crossings has worked out so far around here.
And we know who would be first in line to buy that share.
And also potentially some movement on education funding and whether or not the legislature gets serious about fixing some inequities there. I'm not sure that they will, but these are things that we're going to be looking at. I'll be talking about them next week on the show for sure. Also a lot of automotive news as well. But look for all your news at DeadlineDetroit.com. Allan Lengel, thank you very much for being here. Nancy Derringer,
you.
always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks to Michael Lucido as well for engineering this broadcast
Yay,
today.
Michael.
Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll be back next week. Hey, the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit is made possible by Samara Toss, which is the state's largest private foster care and adoption agency. But they do a heck of a lot more than that. They've been serving homeless families, persons with disabilities, abused and trafficked women. They're also one of the largest resettlement agencies in the state. They provide market rate and affordable housing for seniors and HUD housing for families. And they also have skilled nursing, memory care, and rehab communities in Grand Rapids, Cadillac, and Saginaw. Samara Toss, thanks for their support. Great organization doing great stuff all around the state.